Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, how one invasion shocked the world. It all began with one question. How did a dictator with a flair for grand speeches and even grander military uniforms nearly ignite a global oil meltdown? Why did Saddam Hussein, already infamous for dragging Iraq through a grueling 8-year war with Iran, decide to storm Kuwait in a convoy of tanks and arrogance? And what made the world's only superpower stand up, dust off its warplanes, and say, "Not today, mustache"? This is not just a history lesson. It's the tale of a desert monarch showdown, a geopolitical chest-thump, and a 6-lane highway turned into a fiery symbol of defeat. You'll find hostages, high-tech bombs, scorched oil fields, and the wild political chess match that followed. And here's the kicker. Saddam thought he had a green light. What he missed was that the light was actually a warning sign. So buckle up, viewer, because when one man tried to redraw the map, the world redrew the rules. There was a time in the scorched sands of Mesopotamia. There lived a man with a mustache so formidable it could have declared war on its own. His name? Saddam Hussein, the self-styled Lion of Babylon, who in 1979 formally ascended to the presidency of Iraq with all the subtlety of a tank rolling through a wedding party. But just across the border, Iran was undergoing its own seismic shift. The Shah had been dethroned, and in his place rose Ayatollah Khomeini, a cleric with a revolutionary zeal so potent it could have powered Tehran's grid. Khomeini's brand of Shia revolutionary fervor was not just spiritual, it was political TNT. Saddam, ever the paranoid pan-Arabist, feared this fervor would seep into Iraq's own Shia-majority population, who had long been marginalized from power. So what did Saddam do? He invaded Iran in September 1980, hoping to capitalize on the chaos and perhaps snag a few oil fields while he was at it. What followed was an 8-year bloodbath that made WWI look like a paintball match. Poison gas, human wave attacks, trench warfare. It was a brutal stalemate that ended in 1988 with a ceasefire and no clear victor for. The war left Iraq economically crippled. Rebuilding costs were estimated at $200 billion, while oil revenues limped in at a mere $13 billion per year. Saddam, drowning in debt, turned to his Gulf neighbors, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and asked them to forgive the loans. After all, he argued, Iraq had been their bulwark against Iranian expansion. But the sheikhs, lounging in palatial opulence, were unmoved. They refused. This rejection ignited Saddam's fury, and when he looked for a scapegoat, his eyes settled on Kuwait, a tiny, oil-rich neighbor with a history of being claimed by Iraq as its 19th province. The roots of this claim stretch back to the Ottoman Empire, when Kuwait was nominally part of the Vilayat of Basra. Even after Kuwait gained independence in 1961, Iraq's Prime Minister, Abd al-Karim Qasem, threatened invasion, only to be thwarted by British intervention. By 1990, tensions boiled over. Kuwait was overproducing oil, violating OPEC quotas and driving prices down. For Iraq, whose economy was tethered to oil like a camel to a waterhole, this was economic sabotage. Combine that with unpaid debts and historical grievances, and Saddam saw red. On August 2, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. In just 2 days, Saddam's forces overwhelmed the tiny emirate, and Iraq suddenly controlled 20% of the world's oil supply. Washington, D.C. panicked. If Saddam turned his gaze toward Saudi Arabia, the global oil market would implode. The U.S., fresh off its Cold War victory lap, saw an opportunity to flex its muscles. It organized a massive coalition, launched Operation Desert Storm, and unleashed a technological blitzkrieg that made Saddam's Soviet-era tanks look like rusty lawnmowers. Operation Desert Storm. The sandstorm that shook the world was massive. When mullets were still socially acceptable and the Cold War had just taken its final bow, a new drama unfolded in the Middle East. The villain? Saddam Hussein, Iraq's dictator with a flair for military jackets and delusions of grandeur. The plot? A high-stakes oil heist disguised as geopolitical maneuvering. In August 1990, Saddam decided that Kuwait, his tiny, oil-rich neighbor, wasn't a sovereign nation, but rather Iraq's long-lost 19th province. So, like a bad neighbor who doesn't knock, he sent 300,000 troops across the border and took over the country in 2 days flat. Kuwait's royal family fled, the world gasped, and Saddam sat smugly atop 20% of the world's oil supply. Washington, D.C. didn't just panic. They hit DEFCON. Oh no, you didn't. The idea of Saddam controlling Kuwait's oil and eyeing Saudi Arabia's reserves was like handing a flamethrower to a pyromaniac in a fireworks factory. President George H.W. Bush, channeling his inner cowboy, rallied a coalition of 34 nations, from Britain to Bangladesh, to defend Saudi Arabia and prepare for a counterstrike. This phase, dubbed Operation Desert Shield, was essentially the world's largest game of military Jenga. Over 500,000 U.S. troops deployed to the desert, building up forces while hoping Saddam would blink. Spoiler, he didn't. Diplomacy officially gave up and the skies over Iraq lit up like the 4th of July. The U.S. launched Operation Desert Storm, a military campaign so technologically advanced it made Saddam's Soviet-era tanks look like Fisher-Price toys. Air War. For 5 weeks, coalition aircraft dropped 88,500 tons of bombs, targeting everything from radar stations to Saddam's breakfast nook, probably. Stealth bombers and smart missiles. These weren't your granddad's bombs. They had GPS, laser guidance, and a vendetta. CNN goes to war. For the first time, war was broadcast live. Viewers watched missiles fly like they were tuning into a video game, hence the nickname the video game war. Saddam, realizing he was outgunned, tried to break the coalition by launching Scud missiles at Israel, hoping to provoke retaliation and fracture the Arab support. But Israel, in a rare moment of restraint, didn't take the bait. The coalition held firm. On February 24th, the ground offensive began. It was called Operation Desert Saber, but it might as well have been called Operation Blitzkrieg with style. In just 100 hours, coalition forces liberated Kuwait, crushed the Iraqi army, sent Saddam's troops fleeing so fast they left their boots behind. The infamous Highway of Death became a symbol of Iraq's retreat, hundreds of vehicles bombed as they fled Kuwait, a grim reminder of the war's ferocity. On February 28, Bush declared a ceasefire. Kuwait was free, Saddam was humiliated, and the U.S. had just flexed its post-Cold War muscles like a bodybuilder at a beach party, but Saddam remained in power. The coalition chose not to march to Baghdad, fearing a power vacuum and regional chaos. Instead, they left Saddam to stew in his palaces until the next chapter in 2003. Operation Desert Storm wasn't just a war, it was a statement. The U.S. had emerged as the sole superpower, capable of organizing a global coalition and executing a high-tech war with surgical precision. It changed military strategy, international relations, and how wars were covered in the media. In the blistering summer of 1990, Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq and self-appointed regional drama king, decided he'd had enough of Kuwait's economic warfare. What was this warfare, you ask? Kuwait had been pumping oil like it was going out of style, driving down global prices, and in Saddam's view, draining Iraq's post-war piggy bank. He accused Kuwait of slant drilling into Iraq's Rumaila oil field, which, to be fair, was like accusing your neighbor of stealing water from your garden hose while you were still watering your own lawn. Kuwait, however, was not in the mood to play nice. They refused to forgive Iraq's war debts and dismissed Saddam's accusations with the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug and a try me. Their oil ministers didn't flinch, their diplomats didn't blink, and their emir didn't budge. It was a masterclass in obstinacy, and Saddam took it personally. On July 21st, Saddam deployed 30,000 troops to the Kuwaiti border. It was a flex worthy of a dictator's Instagram story. The international community, sipping espresso and watching from afar, assumed it was all bluff and bluster. Surely he wouldn't actually invade, they said. He's just posturing. Spoiler alert, Saddam was not bluffing. At 2 a.m., Iraqi tanks rolled into Kuwait like they were late for a dinner reservation. In less than 24 hours, the Kuwaiti army, 14,000 men strong but woefully outmatched, crumbled. The emir and his entourage fled to Saudi Arabia in a convoy of Mercedes-Benz limousines, proving that even in crisis, style matters for. Saddam, meanwhile, was popping metaphorical champagne in Baghdad. He annexed Kuwait, declared it Iraq's 19th province, and gained control of over 20% of the world's oil reserves. He called it returning the branch to the root. The rest of the world called it a problem. The United Nations wasted no time. Within hours, Resolution 660 was passed, demanding Iraq's immediate withdrawal. Sanctions were slapped on Iraqi oil, Kuwait's assets were frozen, and Saddam's economic dreams were iced. He had gambled big. and thought he'd covered his bases. Just a week before the invasion, Saddam met with April Glaspie, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. She told him that the U.S. had no opinion on Arab-Arab conflicts, a statement so vague it could have been written by a fortune cookie. Saddam interpreted it as a green light. Glaspie later clarified that she had warned against military action, but by then, the tanks were already rolling. President George H.W. Bush, a man known for his calm demeanor and steely resolve, was not amused. He vowed to evict Saddam from Kuwait, one way or another. While the U.S. had tolerated Saddam's antics during the Iran-Iraq War, they drew the line at him controlling a fifth of the world's oil. Bush dispatched Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney to Saudi Arabia to strike a deal. King Fahd, worried that Saddam might extend his desert road trip into Saudi oil fields, agreed to host U.S. troops. Thus began Operation Desert Shield, with American soldiers landing in Riyadh like it was spring break for the military. Back in Washington, Bush saw the invasion not just as a geopolitical crisis, but as a moral one. He compared Saddam to World War II's most infamous dictator and warned that appeasement would only embolden future tyrants. The stage was set for a global showdown. Bush began assembling a coalition that would make the Avengers jealous. 32 nations united against Saddam. The Gulf War was no longer just about oil. It was about international law, sovereignty, and sending a message to despots everywhere. You can't just annex your neighbor and expect the world to send flowers. In a move that screamed villain in a Bond film, Saddam decided to hold thousands of foreign workers in Kuwait as human shields, hoping to deter an attack. It was a cruel, desperate ploy that backfired spectacularly. Instead of sympathy, he earned global disgust and a few extra pages in the How Not to Win a War Manual 2. By December 1990, the hostages were released, likely because even Saddam realized that using civilians as sandbags wasn't winning him any fans. The United Nations, not known for its speed but definitely for its paperwork, passed Resolution 678, giving Saddam a deadline, January 15, 1991. Withdraw from Kuwait or face all necessary means, a diplomatic way of saying, we're coming with everything we've got. 5. Saddam ignored it. So on January 17th, the coalition launched Operation Desert Storm, beginning with a thunderous air campaign over Baghdad. Hundreds of planes dropped thousands of bombs, and the city dimmed like someone had unplugged it from the Grid 7. For 6 weeks, coalition forces unleashed high-tech fury, laser-guided missiles, stealth fighters, and precision strikes. Western media portrayed it as clean and surgical, but reality was messier. Civilian casualties mounted, and Iraq's infrastructure, water plants, power grids, bridges, was reduced to rubble. 7. As Iraqi forces retreated, they torched over 600 oil wells, turning Kuwait into a flaming inferno. It was dramatic, cinematic even, but strategically useless. The coalition rolled on, undeterred by the smoke and fire. On February 24th, the coalition launched its ground assault. Iraqi troops, battered and bewildered, surrendered en masse. American fears of a Vietnam-style quagmire evaporated like mirages in the desert. 9. Then came the infamous Highway of Death, a 6-lane road north of Kuwait City, where retreating Iraqi forces were trapped and annihilated by coalition airstrikes. The carnage was so intense that global media questioned the ethics of it all. Under pressure, the Bush administration called it. Exactly 100 hours after the ground war began, a ceasefire was declared on March 3, 1991. Saddam had lost Kuwait, his military was in tatters, and his reputation was scorched beyond repair. But the story didn't end there. Inspired by Saddam's defeat, Kurdish and Shia groups in Iraq rose up in rebellion. For a moment, it seemed the dictator's days were numbered. But the uprisings were crushed, and Saddam proved that while he couldn't hold Kuwait, he could still hold Iraq with an iron fist. Don't miss our next episode, Iran-Israel Showdown. The shadow war goes public. Israel's preemptive strikes, using F-35I's stealth jets and bunker-busting bombs, Israel has targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure, killing top scientists and generals. Iran's retaliation, hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles have rained down on Israeli cities, breaching even the Iron Dome defense system. Global fallout. The U.S. is weighing direct involvement, while Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE scramble to de-escalate the crisis through diplomacy. Civilian impact. Tehran's metro stations have become bomb shelters, and Israel's hospitals have taken direct hits. Nuclear tension. Iran's uranium enrichment is now at 60%, and the IAEA is sounding alarms about a potential breach of non-proliferation norms. This conflict is a masterclass in modern warfare, diplomacy, and brinkmanship. It's got everything: high-tech weapons, ideological rivalry, and the looming threat of a regional meltdown. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. If you enjoyed this tale of hubris, high-tech warfare, and highway horror, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you never miss another story that's equal parts history and drama. More intrigue awaits. Stay curious.